Before we start, everybody smile because I'm going to take your picture. My wife won't believe it that I had a full room. See, honey, I need to come next year. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Thank you. Well, since you made the effort and you're probably also wanting me not to run over so you can get to your next session on time, let's get started. I think I'll start with the introduction, so whoever comes by, they'll probably just miss the hoop. But you already probably read my biography. I'll just be super quick. My name is Alejandro. I'm a senior consultant at Polaris Solutions. We're a Microsoft certified partner, so we focus on technologies on the Microsoft stack. My role primarily as a consultant is to focus on all things quality and software testing. I do also mobile development and Agile consulting. But you probably don't care as much about that as probably why is he talking about SpecFlow today. I am super passionate about quality. I started as a developer. When I graduated from college, I went as a Visual Basic developer. We were converting apps from, well, I don't think we called them apps back then. We were converting systems from Clipper into Visual Basic. So we were going from green screens to Windows 95, 98. And so that was kind of a fun time, but then the web came up and somehow I ended up in software testing. I was super frustrated that we couldn't make better software. So I went into software testing. I spent a good 12 years in software testing. I got incredibly frustrated too, because as a tester, I wasn't treated sometimes as a software engineer. They thought I was a truck driver who just happened to need a job. And so, yeah. So then I decided to do a comeback as a developer. Along the lines of the web, I learned Java. So when it came back to going back to the .NET platform, which I really like, I grew up in a Windows house. I know Macintosh too, but Windows was kind of the thing in the house. So C# was a lot easier. So I started doing a lot of work with C#, which led me to use some of the automation tools, because back then it was Quality Center and Rational and open source this, HTTP unit, JUnit. So then it was like, okay, let's go look at the .NET stack. And throughout all of that came the Agile revolution. And I'll talk about the evolution of software methodologies, but that kind of sums up the introduction. So I know this stuff. I love quality. I hope you are here driven by that passion for quality as well, because that's what this is all about. The mandatory sponsor slide. Then make sure you stop by, get a couple of free mints, and give your information away so you can get in the raffles for the iPads and Surface Pros and whatnot. We're a sponsor too, so stop by, say hi if you want to chat some more about this. But so let's get into this. So let's talk about the evolution of the role of testing. I was telling you how I was frustrated that I didn't feel like I was treated as a first-class citizen. I felt like I was a mindless chimp just banging keys on a keyboard, and that was kind of the expectation that, hey, surely you will find defects by just doing that. And I don't want the focus to be so personal because it hurts, but think about the role of testing, because I am sure more than one person here, raise your hands. When I graduated, there was no test team, no BA, no project manager. It was 3 guys and our boss, and we did the whole thing. So it was like, what Agile, right? It was like we were freaking the mother and fathers of Agile. At least that's how I felt. So who was in that situation where you guys did it all? Analysis, sure. User training, sure. Somebody found a defect. I used to work at a coffee factory. I used to have to cover my head and go to the factory, go to the inventory. Smells good. What happened again? Oh yeah, when I push this button, blah, 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 blah. So go back to your computer, because there was no laptop, right? Go back to the big beige thing and hey, try again. So the drive for quality, as things got more complicated, well, we needed to start splitting responsibilities because things got kind of out of hand. So developers needed a hand with testing. And the Y2K bug, I think, was a good time for us to realize that, yeah, we kind of need dedicated testers. So testing, I think, started taking a more prominent role. But really, testing doesn't bring quality. Because if you think about it, testing just goes after the fact. We already created crap. Hopefully we'll get lucky if somebody finds the crap. But engineering, and particularly software engineering, I think is the most difficult of all of the engineering branches, because you can hand blueprints to a mechanical engineer or a construction engineer and the same blueprint to 3 different engineers, and most likely you're going to get some version of the same thing. But you hand requirements to 3 different developers, even in the same state, and I'm sure you're going to get something completely different. So as we started realizing that testing didn't inject quality into a product, we started looking at manufacturing. How were they so popular and so successful, like Toyota was doing all of the quality practices? So it's really about making the units of work foolproof. So if I'm going to give you something, even if it's waterfall, even if it's just throw it over the wall, I did everything in my power to ensure that the quality of the work that I produce is per the specifications that I received. So when I pass it over, if you're Boeing and you're fabricating an airplane, as you advance in the assembly line, well, you kind of have to make sure that if you do the turbines are fine, right? And when somebody has to test the ignition, then you're not blowing everything up. So that took us through an interesting progression of testing practices. Testers started getting involved a little earlier. Other people started doing testing. Unit testing became popular. And then other things like the ones we're going to talk about in the automation pyramid came to be. Because yeah, we talk about automating tests. Don't think of this test automation pyramid, is that right? Pyramid as a progression. So you don't have to do one and then the other and then the other. Think about it as a money bag. Most bang for your buck, the money is concentrated at the bottom. So not the money it costs you, the money you get. So the more you do close to the core, close to that, ensuring that what you're producing when you're producing it, the less likelihood of finding issues. And I know I'm preaching to the choir. You always look at me like, did I come to the right class? So, but we have evolved into other practices. And you're thinking, hey, acceptance testing should go at the top. This is not a progression. This is where you should spend most of your time doing things. So after you hopefully do some type of unit testing, TDD or non-TDD, I don't care, the next thing you need to do is focus on the definition of done. So those of you who are practicing Agile and Scrum, you heard of the definition of done. That's the contract. What is this thing supposed to do that we are producing, whether it's a mobile app or an enterprise app or I don't know, Internet of Things, embedded software. We have a definition of what it's supposed to do. And we have names of who are expecting that to be that way. So ideally, this should be executed in the same place or demonstrated to people that are involved in accepting that behavior. In automation testing in the pyramid, the next layer of things is graphic user interface tests. And you really want to do only things that are truthfully just things that can only be reproduced through the UI. If you're trying to validate business logic through the UI, you should have done that down here or somewhere here. And I'll go into more details about what's acceptance testing in the context of this conversation. But really, your GUI test should be just about what can the GUI introduce that could change things. At the very end, really is anything you could not do, then do it manually. And there's 2 cases here. Things you run out of time to do, but you should automate later, and things you can absolutely not do with any automated means, because there's going to be things that you just can't automate. Maybe we're just not evolved enough to create the technology that can automate those things. There is an exception to the rule, and that's exploratory testing. That is an okay, accepted by the fathers of quality method of observing quality in a very unbiased way, but that's another story. So since we're at days of .NET, let's look at the Microsoft side of things. If you're a Visual Studio user, of what facilities you have to perform some of these layers. So as you may imagine, you can pick your own flavor of some XUnit type of framework, like NUnit in this case, to do unit testing. And yes, you can pick a methodology like TDD or not. For acceptance testing / business driven development or automated testing, acceptance test driven development, you can use SpecFlow. And that runs with Visual Studio. For automated testing of the UI, there is coded UI and other tools. For exploratory testing and manual testing in the Visual Studio stack, you have MTM. And like I said, there's also a progression of maturity, not so much of a linear following this, but as companies and individuals mature in understanding how quality is really injected into what we do, that's how you start realizing that you need to do more here and then move through the layers. I love this slide. You all played Mario Brothers, right, at some point in your life. So the only reason I'm bringing this up is because probably you've heard BDD and ATDD. Just like Mario and Luigi, it's the same damn thing. Some people prefer to play with Luigi, some people prefer to play with Mario. My first name happens to be Mario. I'm Mario Alejandro, so I kind of like Mario just for that. It's a natural bias. But you may have your own choices. Luigi's taller. But they're the same thing. ATDD, which stands for Acceptance Testing Driven Development and Behavior Driven Development. They kind of came up at the same time. Yes, they were agile techniques that were born as a response to TDD. Started around 2003, believe it or not. And really the concept behind this, and there's a lot of lingo, is how do we define software behavior through plain English discussions? How can we document it so that it's not so obscure? And this led us into something called Cucumber, which was one of the precursor tools. And I'll talk about Cucumber in a few minutes. But yeah, there are tools that were devised to do that. But it's really about this, discussing acceptance criteria with examples. So perhaps you have heard about specification by example, because that's what SpecFlow is about. That's what SpecFlow kind of got its name. Specification by example refers to documenting the specifications of the behaviors of your software through examples of what it needs to be done. So when you read it, you're going to read the equivalent of a use case, which in Agile is your user story. But now you're putting it in an intermediate format, if you will, instead of writing test cases, so that it can become a contract and then be automated. And we'll see how that happens. The reason this was so popular back in the day, and still very popular, is because it makes, or helps rather, teams focus on why. Why are we coding this? What is the benefit of this? Which led us today to the definition of done. A lot of you who are using Agile methodologies, before you start your sprint or your coding effort, you have to make an agreement, right? You have to determine, how do I know that I'm done? If you're saying, I'm done, but you're not really done because you didn't test this, or it's not really complete, you're cheating the system. You're moving a task to be completed when it's not really done. Or you're claiming that a feature is complete. So that's where all of that became so popular. And so I'm here to tackle a couple of scenarios. I'm assuming one of the following, I think 5 or 6. One of the following scenarios. Number one, you're maybe not doing Agile development, but you're seriously, or your company is seriously considering going there, and you're thinking, what the heck am I going to do with my testers? Or how am I going to handle testing in an Agile environment? Because back to the discussion of my first job, hey, developers do everything, right? Developers write the test, so do we need testers? How are we going to handle testing? So there's that big question mark. Scenario number 2, perhaps you're already kind of there or halfway there, and your testers are kind of like, I don't know what to do. Should we keep them? Are they looking for jobs because they're nervous? So scenario number 3, your testers are still there, their jobs are safe, or whoever is doing the testing part, but they still don't feel very agile. It still feels like they're doing waterfall testing in an agile methodology. They're still waiting for the code to be done instead of doing it while things get developed, and most likely your iterations are getting slower and slower over time because you're just coding more and more stuff. Next scenario, you're just curious, or you can find a better session that didn't have chairs, although the ones in the back obviously were curious enough. Did I miss any other scenario? Somebody else has a different variation of those.
Need to know more about SpecFlow because I'm working on that for a year. Need to know about the community who is working here, collaborate with them.
Thank you. So how many people have heard of SpecFlow before coming to this talk? How many of you are using SpecFlow today? Okay. Excellent. So for those of you who don't know, if you heard of Cucumber before, well, SpecFlow is not a pickle. It's Cucumber for .NET, not to be confused with a pickle. It's an automated testing tool. Make sure that's clear. It's an automated testing tool. It runs acceptance tests written in BDD or ATDD style, whatever you want to pick. And like I said, it's Cucumber for .NET. If you're curious about history, Cucumber was written in Ruby, but they ported it to a whole bunch of languages. So instead of Microsoft saying, hey, we're going to write our own thing, they just literally ported the code and just, they could have called it Cucumber for .NET, but there's an organization that creates or maintains the source code of SpecFlow. And it's free to download. You just go to your NuGet package manager and you can install SpecFlow. If you let them, they'll charge you for other tools, but SpecFlow just out of the box is free. The only thing you need to use it is, of course, like I said, Visual Studio, the SpecFlow package, and you need to learn to speak a new language, which is gherkin. I'm kidding. Gherkin is more of a nomenclature. So, well, I'll get to gherkin in a few seconds, but it's still English, so don't panic. We'll get to gherkin in a second. How do we use it? It's as easy as 1, 2, 3. You write the behaviors with the gherkin conventions. And that is just like a template. And I'll show you. It's given when then if. I'm already giving it up, but it's English. You specify the behavior by writing plain English sentences. Then you write the automation. And then you just run automation and maintain it like every other thing. What is so special about this? So I'm going to run through an example. And I think you're going to love this example. So gherkin, not to be confused with gremlin. Sounds very similar. But basically, you describe behaviors with the following convention. You can call out the feature with in order to as a I want to. So in order to fill out a McDonald's order as a McDonald's employee, I want to, I don't know, use the order taking system to fulfill the order. And the behavior or scenarios are all of the different scenarios that you can do. Maybe you can do the drive-through. Maybe you can do the somebody walked in. Maybe you have a customer that is deaf, and you have to give them a special menu. And there's all kinds of things. But so you use the given when then nomenclature. So for example, for a happy path for a happy meal at McDonald's, you could say given a customer in the drive-through, when they order their Happy Meal, then I punch buttons in the order taking system and I give them their Happy Meal and we charge them for the order. And, you know, a lot of things can happen. So you're not constrained to these 3 lines. We're going to see really quickly that you can add multiple layers of specification, which is what makes this so enjoyable. Let's take a more serious example. A feature called Add Customers. Not McDonald's anymore. So here's the feature definition. In order to store new customer information as a user of the plug your company name there system, I want to be able to create and store new customers. Plain vanilla, there is really no more to it. And you shouldn't really spend like 2 hours trying to nail this. Just keep it simple. Scenario 1, happy path. Given a user has entered information about a customer, when he/she completes entering more information, maybe the screen was called more information, then the customer information should be stored in the system. Sounds pretty vague, right? But this is kind of a first pass. So you can be more elaborate. And he/she has provided a first name and a last name. Perhaps that's the only information you absolutely need to create a new customer. In this case, let's pretend that that's all you need. And what did I change in this one? Those look exactly the same. OK, I must have cut something else. But I wanted to show you that you can add more specification to each one of the lines. So you can say, this is the context. This is what's happening. This is the action. And here is the result. So here's where you will assert the results, per se. And you can assert multiple results. So let's look at the scenario number 2, missing required data. Given a user has entered information about a customer, but has not provided first and last name, when he/she completes entering the information, then they will be notified about the missing data. So think about pop-up dialog. And the customer will not be stored in the system. So if you start thinking about automation, you're like, oh, so I have to verify that they receive a message and that the data did not make it to the database, that I did not store a bogus record. So I will talk about different scenarios of tackling the thought process that brought me here when I describe, hey, maybe some of you are in this boat, maybe some of you are in this boat. But I want you to quickly think about the following scenario. Depending on the mix of people that you have in your teams, you may have BAs and devs and QAs, or maybe the BA is doing the QA job, or the QA guy or girl is doing the BA role. However that happens, maybe your Scrum Master is more involved. This then could be 10 lines long. And depending what layer you're hitting, it could be shorter or smaller. If you're wanting those people, when they get together, to agree on the behavior, each one of them is going to add a line and saying, well, we should check this. Oh, and we should check this. Oh, and we should check this. So the specification, the contract, the definition of done is saying, to be able to achieve that scenario, to fulfill the feature, we have to do all of these things. And then we have to do a verification of all of these different things. Where the magic stops is that, well, somebody has to automate all of that. SpecFlow doesn't automatically automate. It creates stops for you automatically, but all of the filler is the automation engineer. Whoever happens to be the SpecFlow automation person, they have to write that. So to give you a better idea, let's flex your, not pickle, your cucumber.net muscle. I don't have a whiteboard here, but who has paper and notepad? I see one here, so you're volunteer number 1. Step over here, please. And they were like, oh, I don't have one. So yeah, I know. Sorry, come on. And I need one more. I need one more volunteer. Come on, or we will be late. So what's your role in real life?
Programmer, analyst.
Programmer.
QA specialist.
QA.
Manager.
Ah! Wow. No, I'm saying I couldn't have picked before I have dev, QA, and the business. So we're going to come up with a feature, and you guys have to write a given when-then scenario. Just going to ask you for one. You can do 2 if you feel like so, but just do 1. So does anybody have any good idea for a feature? Do we keep our story with Add customer data, or does anybody have a funky idea that you want to throw in the mix? Okay. We are Coca-Cola, and we sell vending machines to sell soda. So the feature that I want you guys to work on, I guess I'm the Scrum Master or product owner. So the feature that I want you guys to work on is the dispensing of a soda. So soda dispensing, feature 1 is happy path. I put the exact change on the machine. So go ahead, write it down, and then we'll share with the rest of us. If you want to do the exercise in your minds, think about how you will process this. Now remember your role, so you have to think like a QA person, think like a dev. What things would you like to see done? Remember the pyramid. If you already unit tested it, it doesn't go in SpecFlow. So we'll revisit that in a second, but that's all I'm going to say. And you have 5 minutes. Oh, given when then, let me put it back here. I'll let you take a look at this, and that's for cheat sheet. And don't worry about the feature, just worry about the scenario for now. The feature, we already talked about it. So while they work, there is an interesting mechanic happening. There's people who represent 3 different layers of complexity trying to agree on what makes it done. While they do that, you have to go through all of the dynamics. It needs to fit within a doable range of time, so we can put it in a user story, or we can maybe break it into a couple of user stories or whatnot. But what we're going to see is the result of that get together, and then we'll analyze. Yeah.
Doing that. So what you're describing sounds a lot like requirement elicitation. So why can't the SpecFlow automation and development of feature files be a function of either a bolt-on to unit testing or a replacement for unit testing?
Let me see if I understood correctly. So since this is kind of, you're saying it feels a lot like requirement solicitation. So why don't we do this instead of unit testing, since we're getting these people working together? Okay. There are things you can really, or you shouldn't really be doing at the acceptance layer, because the idea of this specification by example is to bring people together who may have different technical skills. If a team is more technically skilled, sorry, just keeping track of them. If a team has more technical skills, your SpecFlow could be focused on the service layer, and you could be doing integration or unit integration. But your unit testing should still be like the individual unit. Your scripts shouldn't be about, I need to make sure that class A is blah, blah, blah. So you shouldn't really be getting to this level. The purpose of this being in English is that somebody from the business, the product owner, the BA, can look at this and then look at the test results through Visual Studio and see that, yeah, this is all working as we agreed. So it was introduced as a business layer to testing, if you will. But there are teams that sometimes rely a little bit more, because when I show you the Visual Studio template, you're basically running unit tests with NUnit or MS test to instrument SpecFlow. So, but that's kind of bending the rules a little bit. Doesn't mean shouldn't do, but are you doing everything you should be doing at the unit test layer? I don't know if that answered your question.
It's a perspective. I was just curious.
Yeah. Let me check how we're doing on time. 1 minute. Unless you guys are ready, we can.
We're ready.
All right. Okay, so go for it.
I wrote down, given user presents exact money, when button depressed, then dispense soda.
Okay.
High level overview.
Okay.
So I said, given a user enters money and it's the exact amount when she selects their drink, then the soda should be dispensed and change is not given.
Okay.
And then I wanted to what the exact amount was. So 50 cents because you'll need to know how much to enter in. And then I also put what type of product to select, so you can know in testing what to select. But everything else that they said as well, but just a little more detail.
Okay. This is the super happy path because we're making a lot of assumptions. You could see easily, you could poke holes on a lot of things, but thank you guys. You could think of other things such as the inventory of the soda, just because some vending machines, and I didn't tell you if you could see the sodas themselves. Sometimes you go to some that just have the pictures, and you punch and it says, sorry, we're sold out. So perhaps it's like, and the machine has inventory, and the machine is not full, because sometimes they don't take any more money, and the machine's still accepting cash. Maybe, I don't know if you have bills or coins, and so we can go crazy. And the idea is not to go crazy either. The idea is that you together need to prioritize. The other thing I noticed is everybody wrote their own thing. We should have seen like one definition, and everybody will have like put their own piece on the layers of the sandwich. But hey, no problem at all. That's how people start anyway. But as you can see, the mindset of each one of them was focused on different things. The business thought about the largest level of least complexity. So back to your comment, he's not thinking about classes or methods or whatnot. He's thinking, well, this thing, I push the button, I get a soda. These guys have to figure out inventory, money. Is the machine plugged to the wall? Maybe the machine is not even plugged, and hey, why is it not working right? So there's all kinds of scenarios. So thank you so much, guys. You can sit down. So if we want to see this in real life, I hope you can read that. If not, I can zoom in a little bit. But when you use Visual Studio to write this into it, you get a template when you install SpecFlow, and you don't have to press tab. It actually automatically indents things for you and color codes and whatnot. And if you follow the right nomenclature, it's going to look like this. You can parameterize data and use tables. And the table actually can be read as an object. So instead of going field by field, you can actually get all of that as an object and say, hey, given this object, I can just go through the data inside the table and go through each one of the rows of data. One interesting thing to notice here, this is one feature, and all of the scenarios are right underneath. So if you need to maintain that feature, you go back here and you add more scenarios, take scenarios away. And this will go under source control because this is basically part of your solution. We're going to see the procedure of how you go about adding SpecFlow to Visual Studio in just a second. There are a couple of gotchas that I'm going to describe because some of the given sentences are probably going to be the very same one for a lot of your scenarios. There are things I unfortunately won't have enough time to cover here, but there's such a thing called a background, so you can reuse some of the setup and just put the same background for all of your scenarios. So if, for example, in the case of the vending machine, well, you always have to start with, I make a selection. I don't care what that selection is because you don't know if it's going to have Pepsi and Coke and this and that. So you could set up like something of that nature, or a login, or a, I don't know, card swipe, whatever the prerequisites are to get to the point where you can interact. Because this automation scenario will either go at a service layer and expect to have something in place, or if you want to use the UI, you could open a browser or your application. And so those first steps, well, because it's an automation test, you kind of have to have them there. So might as well just make them a one spot for everything to consume. This one does not have such a thing. This one somewhat assumes that each scenario is somewhat independent. Maybe, maybe not. Because what happens if you don't catch that? I think they made that mistake when they wrote this. I copied some examples from online just to show you the write-up. But each one of these lines will be converted to a method in your test project. So if this has data and the data is different, it doesn't matter because your method signature is going to be the same. The parameters are being converted in a smart way to say, oh, I'm calling this method with these parameters. But if you reuse the same name, you're going to get an error saying, well, you already have that function defined. What's even crazier at some point is if you have different files and you don't do a good job of record keeping or housekeeping, one feature that has one method called one thing and another feature that has another method called the same thing, your program, your project could get confused. And like I said, if you don't keep good naming conventions and good namespaces, you could easily be calling a feature method from another feature that you did not intend to do. So just, there is some caveats about using plain English. It's very verbose, and as such, you kind of have to find the uniqueness to be able to separate things. It's no different than writing a method. If you write the same method in two different places, you get an error message. In this case, that may not happen exactly the same because it's a little bit more forgiving, but at the end of the day, then it kind of messes your life. So it's kind of a trial and error thing. Let me go to Visual Studio just to show you. And the procedure is basically as follows. Given that I'm now using gherkin. So having written a scenario and feature, or feature and scenarios, I'm going to show you how to generate the stubs. Then where would you go about filling the blanks and how you run this. And so I'm here in Visual Studio. And I have this very simple calculator that is an ASP.NET. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. I'm on the, I guess that's the speaker view. Hang on. Let me kill PowerPoint. There you go. And let's make this a little bigger. And close, 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 close. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pretend this doesn't exist. So at the beginning of time, there is my project here, and that looks horrible. Let's see if I can change resolution really quickly. I'm sorry. (1920 by 1080). That's horrible error. Okay. Nope. Doesn't like that resolution. So let's go lower. Oh, typical Control-Alt-Delete. Just unplug the cable. And let's try again. Sorry about that. Keep my changes. And let's hope this time it works. I mean, typically, if you have a high resolution, if you go higher, it blows up. I went lower, so that should have been the opposite, right? But
Maybe your refresh rate.
yeah, you're right. Okay, so let me go back to what I had then before. And no. Maybe? Nope. SVGA. Let me switch to VGA really quickly.
I'm guessing that the descriptor for your SpecFlow that would be kind of part of your user story, right? That would be kind of one of the artifacts that gets generated, that gets created when you're doing the.
So your SpecFlow specifications are in lieu of test cases.
Yeah.
So you'll have user stories in lieu of requirements in the old ways. And in lieu of manual test cases, you have specifications.
And then so you then take those specifications, feed them into SpecFlow, and then it'll generate those test harnesses that you were showing us a second ago, right?
Yes.
Okay. That's the general workflow as far as.
How do we switch? Where is the projector? Oh, that's right here. I have to switch to VGA. Source.
Integration tests or more like unit tests? I mean, do you actually go out and hit an actual web service and database and all that if you need to do so?
If you want to do so, you can. And I was going to cover that. Let me talk about that first before I show you the demo, because I feel like that was the message I wanted to give you guys more so than the technicalities, because you can always go to the tutorial and figure out that piece. But oh, they already saw that. Come on. So, So the different approaches to tackle different situations, and again, it goes hand by hand with the technical skills of your team. I've, as a consultant, have been in companies where a black box tester became part of an Agile team, and they have picked a couple of coding skills, and they got pretty good. Maybe they were doing automation before the switch, and so SpecFlow was a pretty easy transition, because even though it's C# and maybe their previous life as an automation engineer was all scripting, they can write some good automation and go and instantiate some classes or some services, and then just go and test, hey, if I send a message to this service, can I get what I'm supposed to? No invocation of the UI. For integration, it's kind of the same thing. You take more of a transactional approach where you go from step to step to step. Maybe you're in a healthcare system that you're signing up to be a provider, and you go through the sign-up process, and then you go and look up your information. So all that sign-up procedure took a whole lot of steps. If you want to, you can invoke the UI. There are plugins that you have to add to SpecFlow, because out of the box, neither SpecFlow or Visual Studio will help you with, sadly. But you can use Selenium, or I don't know how to say this on Watin or Watin, W-A-T-I-N. I call it Watin. All they are is drivers to be able to open Chrome or Internet Explorer or Safari, or I don't know if they support Firefox. But basically, they give you an object. You create bar, IE, browser, and then you instantiate your browser with your URL, and then it does the job of opening the browser for you in 1 or 2 lines of code at most. Now, that's the easy part. The second part, where it gets more difficult, is depending on the complexity of your app. If you're using Angular, if you're using ASPX or MVC, the discovery of the elements is the same thing you're going to see with any other test automation tool. It's going to be as good as the drivers you're using. So Selenium, I think, is pretty popular because they're pretty good about being able to find elements in the UI of different types of applications, Windows Presentation Foundation, HTML, ASP. So all you do is just say, find me a button that has a name of button plus, if you're testing a calculator, and then you say, click, and then it clicks that button. And so if your team has the skills, then it's probably going to require some, or has or no, or doesn't have skills. It's going to require a combination of somebody mentoring. Typically, what I see happening is the developers coach the testers or whoever is doing the automation to get them to the point of now they can write more on their own, and maybe at some point they come across something that is a bit complicated in this layer, and they help them hook that up. But then they write all of the other scenarios, because all they do is just have to copy paste that code. But they're dealing with code, basically. It gets a little bit tougher when the BAs are the ones doing testing. Typically, and you know, this is not always the case, but typically the BAs have not done much in terms of automation or coding. So unless they took classes on the side or whatnot, yeah, they can write the gherkin stuff all right and help you with the specification, but somebody has to write that automation. So the team has to make the determination, is SpecFlow right for us? Because who's going to write the code, right? Like I said, this will not spew out the code for you. You have to fill in the blanks. And so that's basically this slide, is what is your combination in terms of true skills. If you just have BA skills, not a BA person, because like I said, the skills could differ by people, but if you just have somebody with the skills of BA, you can agree on the specification, but you developers are going to have to automate. On case 2, could be a combination of test and the BA team writing both pieces. Maybe the BAs take the job of writing the gherkin, and the testers add on to it. The developers could add their own. And as the test team gets a little bit more savvy of the layers, you can add more. So when we were talking about the vending machine, pretend the vending machine is a software-driven vending machine, which probably is in the background, as opposed to a mechanical like a typewriter. So the software that is executed, you have to go through multiple things. Hey, am I discounting money from, or am I adding the money to the bank so that when the guy comes and gets the money, he knows how much he's getting, so he doesn't get the money and has to count it manually, right? I never see people counting. I'm hoping there is something that says, there should be $1,200 here, and they just are like, yeah, it's $1,200. So things like that. Okay, so let me see how we're on time. Okay, we're about, yeah, we have about 10 minutes or so to show you really quickly. So the way you add, same problem. Cross fingers, please. Duplicate. Okay. Well, it doesn't look as blurry as last time, I hope. That part doesn't concern me as much. When we get here, I can zoom the text in or out. So this is a solution. It can be a C# solution, web solution, whatever. You basically start by adding a new project. Now, the project type has to be a unit test project. So when somebody asks me, can I just do my unit test with SpecFlow? Sure, but now you have to write also the specification, which is the English part. So to me, having all the background in testing, somebody has to write the test, and then somebody has to execute that. So as long as somebody is willing to take the responsibility, go for it. So I already have another project here, but I'm just going to call this my SpecFlow tests. And this is not with SpecFlow. This is just the plain vanilla Visual Studio unit test template. So nothing special about it. I did choose C#. I haven't played with Visual Basic, but I'm guessing SpecFlow must also support Visual Basic. I haven't played with that, so I'll investigate that. I'll let you know. But okay, so like any test project, as you expect, it comes preloaded with a dummy unit test. I'm just going to delete it because I really don't need it. But to be able to add that here, I have to go and manage the NuGet packages here. And actually, the better way is to go to my, where's my, manage NuGet packages. Sorry, my screen is rather limited here. Don't go away. Oh, here's the search. So 1.9 is the latest version when you search for SpecFlow. That's the one I'm using right here. And there are other variations of it. There's something called SpecRunner, I believe it is, SpecRun, That is kind of their test runner tool to see fancier reports, but that's not free. The caveat is if you don't pay for SpecFlow, they inject a slight delay. So when you're running this test, you're going to see that it takes a little bit extra. You're thinking, what's going on with my machine? I have 45 gigs of RAM or whatever, 48. And I don't have 48. But so yeah, that's kind of the inconvenient, but it's not that horrible. So it is manageable. All right, so say put SpecFlow 1.9 there. Yes, please. So if you look in your references, you have now techtalk.specflow. If we wanted to do the UI stuff, we will have to also add Selenium or Watton the same way. But right now, I don't think we'll have time to do that. So the next step is you start to add a test. So just like you add unit tests in your test project, once you have SpecFlow properly installed, SpecFlow template items should appear in Visual Studio. So ironically, they don't appear under test. I don't know why. If I go to test, they don't show up in there. So just don't freak out. Just go at the very top level or search for SpecFlow. So first of all, like I said, we have to create a feature file. There's step definition and hooks. Events are a little bit a more advanced topic, but you always start with a feature file, and you name it the feature name, and then the extension is .feature. So in this case, we're going to say, remember, the feature can have multiple scenarios. So maybe the feature is dispense soda. Well, this is the calculator, but just keeping track with the example we were doing. So I'm going to call this the dispense soda feature. Out of the box, it will always pre-populate it with this. It's not because I have a calculator and it figured out that, oh, you have a calculator, I'm going to give you a calculator formula. You're going to get this no matter what. Maybe in version 2.0, they'll update this. But so you can just go ahead and change that. Now, just to show you that it does auto-format things for you, I'm going to start another scenario down here. If I can type. And let's just say no soda left. And I start typing, given I have chosen soda type Coke. And I have entered, I don't know, 1.25 bucks into slot. When I press dispense button, then I will not get a soda. I know I missed something there, but and there are no more sodas left. So roughly, that's kind of how you approach it. I guess it does not auto-tab. It does auto-color, but let me see if I compile, if it will push it. Nope, guess no. All right. Don't worry about those things down there. I messed up my project last night trying to prepare for tonight, so that's why I'm creating a new one. But here's the easy part, still living the dream. To generate scenarios, all you have to do is right-click on your feature file. This is scenario-wide. You right-click on the feature file, and you say Generate Step Definitions. Before you do that, I suggest that you create folders, one folder called Features, one folder called Steps, and you organize your files in that manner. You don't have to, but it's kind of nice because at some point you're going to have a whole bunch of tests. Leave them in the main folder, and I'm going to say Generate Step Definitions. It gives you a preview. And this preview right now is just for you to double check that everything you wrote in there is in the list. So check that all of your things are there, because if they're not, maybe you miswrote some part of the gherkin nomenclature. You could have misspelled given or something like that. So let's pretend it all looks good. When I click generate, then you have a choice of where to put your file. So I already created something before, so it's going to the older folder, but that's the other SpecFlow test project. So I wanted to go on the My SpecFlow tests, and I'm going to create a folder called steps. So now what happened? Oh, and by the way, if you're curious, because I know all of you are curious, when you look at the feature file, there's a code behind file. Do not mess that up. Just work on the English part of it and let that automatically refresh the code behind. Do not make changes here. You consider yourselves warned. So here's my feature. Let's look at the steps. So here's what I got. So for every line of English that I wrote, now I get a given I have entered into the calculator an integer with value p0, you have to do something. So if you run this as is, you're going to get an exception saying we're skipping the test because it's not been implemented. And the way you run them is you basically just go back to the feature file. You can right-click, and you now have 2 entries for debug SpecFlow scenarios. If you run them as unit tests, it also works. So you can also go to the test menu and say debug all tests. And it's going to complain because I have some stuff down there. So let me get rid of the other project. So this is Visual Studio 15. It's going through all of the funky stuff. And I think that was my other project. Yeah, that's loading the calculator. But I'm not connected to the internet. But see, this is how easy it was to load the browser, like I told you, right? Let's stop this and get rid of that project. OK, let's compile. It should be happy path. Oh, yeah. It's like, hey, where is end unit? By default, when you load SpecFlow, it defaults to using end unit. So if you want to use the MS test runner instead, you open your app config file. And then you go to this link that is there. Am I on the internet? Please, 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 please. Well, it's right here. So all you have to do is just grab that line that says unit test provider name equals MS test. Go back to app config. You can just put it right underneath. And with that, I just changed the runner of this. So it says, hey, do you want to regenerate your feature files? I think so. Let me look. So now I build, and my test has succeeded because I'm not depending on end unit anymore. So now if I go to my test and say debug all my tests, here's all the wiring up. Tech-tokes flow pending step exception. So I am not instructing Visual Studio to just crash. So it's stopping on this exception. It's basically saying, well, you haven't done anything. You're just saying this scenario is not done, right? So yeah, sure, continue. And I have 2 scenarios, so I'm going to get the same crap twice. Actually, each of these methods has all of that, so I'm going to get that more than twice. I got 2 minutes. Continue. Come on, come on, show me the test results. So if you're worried about reporting and whatnot, this is all integrated with your Visual Studio Flow. So your Test Explorer, which should be visible here, it's going to show you the 2 scenarios that we just wrote. The exclamation mark means, well, there's nothing there to test. You put that exception that I understand. That means that you haven't done it yet. But the rest of the project for you will be to now go to those steps and do that. Quick thing, if you add one more scenario, and I know it's probably going to be a bad thing, but How do you add that scenario to your step definitions? You right-click. Let me change it a little bit to scenario, no money left. So if I right-click and say generate step definitions, it says all steps are bound because given I have money and I have enter. Okay. All right. So, okay. I just changed it enough to make a new one. Do not say generate because you're going to overwrite. What you want to do is say preview. Make sure it looks good. Copy methods to clipboard. It's very manual. And then you go to your steps file. And you simply just copy paste that code there. So when you add more, that's the method to do it. So the next layer will be for you to go in there. I have one here that recent projects and solutions, I believe. That's the one. Come on, come on, come on. So if you want copies of some of these examples, I'll give you my contact info in a very quick minute. You probably barely have time to write it down. But this is the shortest of all of them because my name is rather long. Alejandro RMZ is my Twitter handle. I'll make sure you get a copy of some of the code demos that I've given you. So Alejandro RMZ. Thank you so much. I'm sorry that we ran out of time due to the technical difficulties, but appreciate it.